Welcome to West Virginia Beer Roads, a podcast all about beer from a West Virginia perspective. I'm Erin McCoy, here with my podcast partner, Charles Bockway.
Thanks, Erin. On today's program, we're back with one of our go-to brewers here in Charleston, West Virginia market, and that's Gil Peterson, head brewer at Fife Street Brewing.
Yes, and we are happy to be back at Fife Street. You know, since they opened a few years ago, Fife Street Brewing has been a leader in changing Charleston's downtown local beer scene. They've added so much energy to the downtown market. Together with Bad Shepherd Beer Company and Short Story Brewing, they founded and developed what we call Brewers Row on Summers Street. And this project has dramatically improved the availability and popularity of local brewed beer in the city.
So let's bring on Gil and see how things are going here. And we're going to learn a lot about what's going on at the Fife Street Brewhouse.
Gil Peterson, welcome back to West Virginia Beer Roads.
Thanks for having me back.
Gil, before Charles and I begin firing questions your way, you're going to tell us a little bit about this beer that we've got here. I think you've got a sample for us. You're on.
Yes, we've got our recently released spring seasonal. This is our Raspberry Beret. It is a German-style Berliner Weiss with a lot of raspberry puree in it.
And beyond raspberry, what should we be tasting in this beer?
There is a lot of raspberry. It's hard to get past that.
Super colorful.
The base beer is pretty standard. Basically just a low alcohol German wheat beer.
Yeah, and I know Berliner Weiss are normally very low in alcohol relative to the American standards anyway. And what would this one come in at?
This one comes in at 4%.
Wow, yeah.
Little less than 50% wheat, which is about the standard in that style. But pretty refreshing as the weather is supposed to be warming up.
Yeah, we've had a little cold spell this week that we're recording this, but spring's coming.
It is. There's definitely a beer for it. And as I said, that color comes through with all that puree you said you used.
Yeah, it's a beautiful color. It really is. And it's also nice and tart. Beautiful, and not certainly overly tart at all. I think it's great representative of the style.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very smooth, easy to drink. As you said, good warm weather as we are approaching warm weather.
Well, Gil, we know you just didn't show up at Fife Street Brewing one day and starting your career. But you had a very long and strong background and experience in craft brewing before you were hired here to help open this place. So I'd like for you to begin today by providing our listeners a quick review of how you got started in craft brewing and maybe a list of a few of the places that you brewed prior to coming to West Virginia.
Sure. When I first started home brewing, I got an internship at a place called Mount Pleasant Brewing Company in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. I think they're currently known as Mountain Town, but same location and everything. Didn't do a whole lot of brewing. I was just basically cleaning tanks and filling kegs.
Well, that's where you start.
Yeah, typical intern.
But I did get to utilize the test batch system and do some 5-gallon batches for them, which was pretty fun when I was 21 years old.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and from there, you moved up to some more names that people would recognize.
I spent a little bit of time in Nebraska where I got my feet wet on the production side of things. And then moved to Fairhope, Alabama, where I was the production manager for Fairhope Brewing Company for 5 years.
And Fairhope's been a pretty successful brewery operation, hadn't it, through the years?
Yeah, it was quite a bit larger than I was used to, but it was a good awakening and a good introduction to actually running a larger scale operation.
Yeah, and then you made your way to West Virginia.
Yep, been here since the outset, going on 4 years.
Yeah, that's great. Well, there's no doubt in my mind that your experience before coming to Fife is what's allowed you to put Fife Street Brewing on solid footing from day one. Because I think we've all noticed that this place came out of the gate really strong. It was pretty clear that you had an experienced brewmaster here.
In the past few years, we've seen some pretty big changes nationally in the trends themselves of craft beer. Back when you guys were planning and developing Fife Street Brewing, it wasn't yet so clear that the craft beer industry had peaked nationally and that many market challenges may lie ahead. Challenges like younger people that are drinking less alcohol and strong competition developing from new non-alcoholic options, things like that have come into the market. So what's been your reaction personally to these new realities and to these new challenges and the challenges that they create for a small brewery?
That has led to more of a business decision than a production decision. we don't really have the capacity or the technology to brew non-alcoholic beer successfully. So we kind of just do our own thing here, but luckily our alcohol licensing allows us to retail certain products. So we just outsource our non-alcoholic options, and we get a pretty good market share of that. But for the most part, our sales are still strongly alcoholic products.
Yeah, I mean, you imagine people that walk in off the street and come in the door here at, Fife Street, that they're going to be looking for beer. But again, they may have their friends that come with them, girlfriend, boyfriend, or husband, wife, who's not a beer drinker. And you said that the place has picked up a few, other kinds of products. I mean, maybe what are some of those kinds of products that you're selling here now?
We have started selling Athletic Brewing Company, which is, one of the nation's leaders in non-alcoholic beers. And they've been pretty well received. We do have some Kloss tolerant bottles that has been around for a long time, kind of one of those non-alcoholic staples. And we have discussed trying to do a non-alcoholic option of our own, but until we get some more testing and actually figure out how to do that.
You're right.
Yeah, we'll stick to what we know for now.
Yeah. I can see that that's a challenge for breweries, smaller breweries in particular in the industry, with the changing industry trends in particular.
Well, Gil, Fife Street appears to be continuing as a very strong player in our local beer market. I just have to walk by here on any evening pretty much. Later in the week, certainly weekends, and the place is full. The outdoor seats, if the weather's right, they're full. The Charleston crowd seems to like this place. But I'm just wondering how you see any opportunities for sales growth at Fife, even though you've been doing very well. I mean, how do you grow now?
I think our main focus for the time being is just getting larger scale events planned. Our anniversary parties and some of the bigger downtown events have really benefited us. Day to day, our sales don't fluctuate too much, but if we can have some of those larger events, at Slack Plaza or, selling beer outside of the tap room, it really drives a lot of business.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept too, because I think focusing on a lot of events that bring in a crowd that may not be just regular craft beer drinkers, all of them anyway. I mean, how does that affect maybe what you think in planning beers that you want to keep different things on tap? I mean, how does that affect that?
That's probably our biggest crunch point right now is just balancing our fermentation capacity, keeping the main line stocked, and also rolling out new beers. So we tend to focus on things that have quicker turnaround, where we can brew them in 12 to 14 days rather than 28 days.
Yeah, like your basic pale ale or Charleston beer and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those things take up tank space for, the amount of time that they need, but in the meantime, can't brew anything else. So.
Right. Well, I mean, it's good to hear that business seems to be that strong, and that, still you guys are pumping these events and doing well with them. But I'm just thinking back to maybe 5 years ago, before Fife, and I used to be begging people to open new breweries in Charleston. We just had one down the street here from you, and the town was a lot bigger, and I thought, man, we could support more. But, it took a long time, and finally the guys came in here and you guys opened Fife. But now today we have about, 3 tap rooms here in a row for breweries, and then we have another one over on the west side, not far away. Charleston's still a fairly small city. I mean, we're not particularly growing at the moment. So given that finite market size and the trends that, we've talked about, that people are drinking less, or young people often are drinking less today, do you think there's still room for new breweries to open in Charleston?
The short answer to that question is yes. Even with Short Story opening up next door, the Nano Brewery on the west side, there's a new place in Quarrier Street in the works. I think they'll all be successful. The craft beer market here tends to support everybody. We have plenty of regulars at Fife that we always see at Short Story, and vice versa. I think the biggest issue that new breweries might face is real estate. Downtown real estate usually goes pretty quick. There's no shortage of buildings opening up, but it seems like they fill up pretty fast.
Right.
So there's a lot of planning that goes into opening a brewery, and you've got to be ready to pull the trigger on real estate.
I would imagine, and because of that, I mean, the pricing is also kind of high relative to other parts of town, sir, here in this downtown market, which means any brewery that opens, like Fife, or even a short story tap room, you got to have a crowd coming through. I mean, to pay that rent and all the other expenses.
And talking about that smaller, finite market, as we've already discussed, if you want to stay on top of beer sales here in particular at Fife, what do you see specifically for Fife in terms of beer styles that are growing in popularity and demand?
Currently, our best sellers are leaning toward the more sessionable beers, the lower ABV stuff, the lower bitterness stuff. And 5 years ago, that was a completely different animal. We went through this phase where big IPAs and big flavorful stouts were the thing, and we're kind of trending the other way now. So
really,
in our tap room in particular, the Charleston beer is always number one. It probably always will be number one. Our seasonal Kolsch usually comes in at number two, and the more beer styles that we roll out that are similar to those, I think the better off we're going to be.
Do you think that's somewhat driven by the in unison change in season, or do you think it really is just the market shifting for you from what you're seeing as a brewer?
Back to your point about non-alcoholic beer sales going up and people drinking less, I think it all goes hand in hand a little bit.
That makes sense. Beyond what you just mentioned, what's a beer style that you would predict growth for in the future that may not be as apparent today? Get out that crystal ball. What do you see?
If you would have asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have said German-style Pilsners. They had a little bit of a resurgence back then, and I thought that was a new up-and-coming thing. I was wrong then. I'll try it again.
Okay. Round two.
Yeah, so I think Pilsner beers are, lower alcohol lagers in general are going to see a resurgence here pretty soon.
Yeah, I think that I'm seeing that, at other markets, that I get to. Yeah.
It's definitely something I hear a lot more often than I ever have.
So we're going to be seeing some more lagers here maybe at Fife.
We tried our hand at a couple. We've had varying degrees of success with it.
Yeah, I know it takes more time, and you've got limited space. We're sitting here in the brewery today for listeners that can't see where we are. So it's a limited amount of tank space, and I know the lagers do tie up the tanks for a lot longer, and that means when you're under the gun like you are to get production out to the taps, that could be a problem or at least a struggle for you to offer more lagers.
Yes, we'd have to absolutely love to, but it's just a matter of putting it on the calendar when we can afford to tie up a tank for that long.
Well, we have around 30 other active craft brewers in the state today. Do you ever communicate with any of them? Like maybe comparing notes on beer styles, brewing techniques, ingredient availability, things that keep customers happy?
Communication on Brewers Row is pretty steady. We're always communicating with Bad Shepherd and Short Story. Outside of that, I wouldn't say limited, but not very often do we communicate about ingredients and stuff like that. But we have tossed around the ideas of combining grain orders and stuff like that just to save on shipping with people as far out as Screech Owl.
Okay. Yeah, and Screech Owl, for those that aren't that familiar, it's up in the northern part of the state. So that's a little haul from here.
Yes, not exactly close.
Yeah, but they do sell in this market too, in the Charleston market. At least some. They have a distributor down here.
Okay, Gil, something that will keep your favorite podcasters happy is sampling another Fife Street brew. So
yeah, it's going to be hard to top that first one. That was a dynamite raspberry Berliner.
Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, why don't you go ahead and introduce it?
For round two of sampling today, we have just released today our latest iteration of our Chemical Valley Hazy IPA. So this one was brewed with cashmere, strata, and crush hops.
What's a crush hop?
Yeah, right. I'm like, what?
Crush is actually a brand new one. Never used that one before. We've used cashmere hops in a few options that we've had on the past. Nothing that's been long-term, but Strata and Crush are new ones for us.
Yeah, and Strata's been around a while. I mean, popular with some brewers, and I forget what the taste characteristics are, but I know it's got some specifics kind of that people like.
So yeah, Strata and Crush are typically pretty well used together. They have a lot of the tropical forward flavors that people are looking for in IPAs now. So you should be getting a lot of passion fruit and pineapple from this particular beer.
Yeah, very much in the fruit side, this one is.
Being the first time you said that you had used this in particular, how is it different from what you were using ingredient-wise previously for this particular beer?
So we've released Chemical Valley, I think 4 times now, and always try to change up the hop schedule a little bit on it.
Oh, so it's always varied.
Yep. So we started out just using the classic American hops and just doing the pioneer side of things like Chinook and Centennial. Gotten gradually fruitier with it, and have started experimenting with some different brewing techniques. And I'm pretty happy with it, the way this one turned out.
Yeah, this is very much in the vein of the popular, if you like the fruity, hazy IPAs. This one would be right up your alley.
Well, as we sit here in the brew house at Fife Street Brewing, as I look around, I see some Smooth Ambler barrels behind me. What might be in those?
Yes, we're currently sitting on some of our Sternwheeler Stout in some Smooth Ambler bourbon barrels, and we'll be looking to release that around our 3rd anniversary party next month.
Yeah, so have you used the Smooth Ambler barrels before for other like big beers that you've made? Maybe some, imperial stouts and things in the past?
Got a little bit of a background in barrel aging down south, but this will be the first time with Smooth Ambler, and kind of cool to use a local product to kind of amplify what we're doing.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that.
Well, Fife has been self-distributing at least its core beers in cans for a while now. And I think that distribution has primarily been to bars around the local region, around Charleston, isn't that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, do you ever get feedback from other bars on what they'd like to see you brew?
Not a whole lot, I would say. I think for the most part, our distribution pretty much centers around our mainline series and lower alcohol stuff in general.
Yeah, and when you say the mainline, name a few of those beers in the core.
The Charleston beer and the Kolsch move pretty well in distribution. Charlie West is still hanging in there as it's our West Coast IPA option. But
so when it comes to beers that you can, which you say is pretty much your core lineup, how does that differ when it comes to sales, though, sales volume, when it's in a can versus what you sell in your tap room?
Honestly, our canning process is more for brand recognition and getting the name out there. Volume-wise, we do probably 8 to 10% of our beer in cans.
Yeah, and I think that's something people don't necessarily recognize about a brewery. They see your beers out in cans, or maybe they're at another bar and they see that you can get a Charleston beer or something in a can. They may think that you're making big money on distribution, but that's not really a key business operation here, is it?
Yeah, that's not the case. Our cans are basically distributed in downtown Charleston and a few smaller surrounding areas, but we are a long ways away from being statewide in any capacity.
Well, Gil, with all of your experience in brewing around the country, as well as your experience here in West Virginia, what are some lessons that you've learned about success in running a small brewery?
Take yourself out of the equation. There's all kinds of things that I would love to brew, but you have to listen to the consumer first and foremost. So, all these market changes that we've been talking about, that's something you need to be cognizant of, and brew to cater to your patrons. Which
has got to be such a challenge with your what I love and want to brew versus what I know I need to.
Yeah, there's a great degree of freedom here. If I want to brew a chocolate milkshake marshmallow stout, then nobody's stopping me.
Right. No, but
I'd also like to sell some of it.
Exactly. I get that struggle. But
yeah, I think that's always something that I've heard certainly around breweries that I've been to around the country that a lot of times you'll go into a place and you will see some weird, well, not so much weird, but different, like a theme in the beers, and that's because the brewer just loves sours or something, Other times you see kind of like a little bit of variety, and I think certainly in Charleston, West Virginia, we don't have a big enough market that you can't just be an IPA brewery here. That wouldn't work. So I understand, and I appreciate that, you're cognizant of that. You want to sell beer, and you have to make really what the market wants and not just what you like.
Self-discipline. That's what we call self-discipline.
Well, over the past year, something that Aaron and I have discussed with your brewery owners is their thoughts on expanding Fife Street's footprint. There's been discussion, I know, of adding tap rooms in other towns, and also about how that would create the need for additional brewing capacity and maybe a place to put that. So, Gil, what are your thoughts on that topic currently?
We would really love to take advantage of the satellite tap room laws that West Virginia allows brewers to have, but capacity is one thing that's really hindering us from that. You know, we brew basically just enough to keep this place supplied in the busier summer months. So, a secondary tap room would eat into that supply, and we'd probably just be running out in 2 locations instead of 1.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing, but I get it.
No, yeah, that's true. That is the struggle of a small brewery that makes good beers and that is popular in their community. Yeah.
There is a little bit of talk of, trying to find suitable real estate for a production facility, either in Charleston or somewhere nearby. It's proven pretty difficult to come by.
Well, as you previously discussed, land, real estate right here in this vicinity is a challenge to find.
And it goes quick. Yep.
Yeah. Well, but you're looking. You're at least still actively searching that avenue.
Yep, nothing's set in stone yet. It's kind of a passive search at the moment, but we'll see how the summer goes, and if we need to open up a satellite tap room, then it's definitely something we'll have to look at.
Well, our West Virginia brewing community, as we kind of touched on a little bit, has always been one of camaraderie rather than competition. And by and large, I see brewers getting along well and sharing ideas, information, support, etc. Before we end this podcast today, I want us to talk for a minute about things that you see at other West Virginia brewers that you really like. Is there a brewery or two currently that really impresses you with its brewery operations overall?
Boy, I think Big Timber has it figured out. Their new production facility is a marvel.
Yeah, don't they have it figured out? Yeah, they do a great job.
I'm also pretty impressed with the way that Short Story, keeps their beer stocked. I have not toured their brewery, but I know it's pretty similar in size to ours, and they seem to be all over the place. So whatever they're doing is working for them.
Good.
Any thoughts on collaborations with any of these other breweries? Is that something you have time to even think about?
We did a Brewers Row collaboration probably going on 2 years ago now that was pretty well received. That's, they're local guys. That's pretty easy to do. We'd love to do that again. Definitely opening the idea of opening up to, the state of West Virginia, whether it be here or elsewhere. It just depends on who's got the time and the space.
All right, guys. Some of the other breweries need to be hearing this and coming down and asking Gil, who is an excellent brewer, to kind of join you in a collaboration. That would be fun to see. All right, let's move on. Something we don't really get into much on West Virginia Beer Roads are the more technical things about brewing operations, and with good reason, because our listeners aren't necessarily brewers and know what we're talking about. But I'm talking specifically now about things like laboratory services. I'm very curious about those kinds of concepts in our small breweries. Years ago, when I used to work in the wine and spirits industry, one of the head guys at a large company I worked for would always say, "You get what you inspect, not what you expect." And so, Gil, I'm curious what role that inspection, the inspection process anyway, plays here at Fife Street in your brewing, and when it comes especially to assuring the quality of your beers. What's your opinion on inspecting beer quality and consistency using laboratory-based analysis?
So we have a pretty rudimentary lab set up here that basically focuses more on fermentation and making sure that our beer is consistent from brew day to package day.
Yeah. Well, consistency, that is one of the things that a brewer or a laboratory can really tell you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't, as of yet, shipped our beer off to any bigger labs to tell us what's going on. And luckily, we've been in a position right now where, it sells fast enough that we don't necessarily have to worry about shelf life and all that.
Yeah, that's another side of it, right, that the laboratories play. But, yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about sell-through. You get it in a hurry here.
Yeah, we rely most heavily on just sensory analysis and
Sure.
making sure that, the beer that we're packaging tastes like the beer that we have on tap.
Well, I know it's only springtime right now, but our final topic is summer. So summertime is traditionally the best season for beer sales, which makes sense. Warm weather, sunshine, thirsty. What beers can people expect to appear or reappear this summer on Fife Street taps?
Our kettle sour program is pretty popular in the summertime, so we'll have plenty of different fruited sours coming out. We're going to try to kind of shy away from the hazy IPA fad a little bit and get back into the West Coast IPAs. So we have our double IPA on the brew schedule. We have got a New Zealand IPA in the works. And so we're not typically an IPA-heavy brewery, but we're going to lean that way in the coming months.
Is the New Zealand one a rebrew or a new brew?
That'll be a new one.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, those New Zealand hops have become quite popular. I mean, just down the street here or up the street, you can find other breweries that have experimented recently in some nice blends of those hops, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you get out of that, those New Zealand hops.
Some New Zealand hops can be an acquired taste, but a lot of them are, leaning toward the market taste overall, and being super fruity and tropical. So we're looking forward to experimenting and trying something new.
Cool.
Well, Charles,
Yeah.
I think it's about time we're going to wrap up this session of West Virginia Beer Roads.
Yeah, and we've talked with Gil a couple times before here on West Virginia Beer Roads, but it's always good. You learn something new about the guy and his beers every time we're here.
Well, and as we discussed, everything is ever changing. So you got to check in and see what's up and what's new and what's different.
Yeah.
So
Get over here, Summers Street, the whole block, 3 brewery outlets right here, and Fife right in the middle, the heart of the brewery district in downtown Charleston, West Virginia.
Well, Gil Peterson, the head brewer at Fife Street Brewing, thank you once again for updating us and being on West Virginia Beer Roads.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
This brings us to the close of another podcast. Remember, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast host. Thank you for listening to West Virginia Beer Roads.
West Virginia Beer Roads is a production of BrilliantStream.com.